Welcome back, everyone, to R2Kast number 76 and the second edition of the R2Kast group podcast, which is such a rubbish name because I cannot come up with anything exciting or fun. The first one being with Countryside Learning Scotland. And the group we have today is kind of similar, slightly different, but kind of similar, involved in getting that sort of rural education into schools and vice versa. We'll get onto that in a minute. On Friday, last Friday there, we had Rachel Stratton, the global farmer, who is currently based in Norway. We've been seeing temperatures of negative 28 in the last month. We thought we were struggling, but they have major cold, or up there, I should say, which has been to 20 countries in agriculture, really sort of toured the world and tried everything. So it was an interesting story there. On Friday, we will meet Ben Cross, or Alstroemeria Ben, which I have learned the name of that flower because Mum has helped me. And you will see me know absolutely nothing about flowers, not know what's happening, and learn a lot from Ben as we go through that conversation. But today we have a group very close to my heart, one I've been involved in for the past couple of years, and unfortunately I had to step down my involvement in the last month or two, which I really didn't want to do, but just because of relocation, and that is RHET Ayrshire and Arran. Today we've got Willie, Christine, Elaine and Alec, four people who are involved in different sides of RHET Ayrshire and Arran and very well qualified in telling us what's involved. It is also quite exciting. Two of those names you might recognise, because R2Kast 13, we had Alec Perry, and R2Kast 16, we had Christine Cuthbertson. So both are first times, and that is the first time we've had people in the R2Kast twice. So we are really rubbing shoulders with the stars today. But enough of the rubbish that I'm talking. I'm going to pass you on to, and I'm going to choose one person out, and it's going to be Elaine. Elaine, could you start off by telling us what RHET Ayrshire and Arran, and what RHET, for that matter, is?
Just before we get started with another episode of the R2Kast, I would like to thank our primary sponsors, A-Plan Rural. A-Plan Rural are heavily involved on the social media scene in the ag space with 120,000 followers on Instagram. They use this following to host social media takeovers with farmers throughout the country to showcase their stories. They also post to their rural community blog with further stories about these people in the industry. On top of this, they like to support initiatives that are championing the British agricultural industry, such as myself. So thank you to A-Plan Rural for that.
RHET, RHET stands for the Royal Highland Education Trust, and it doesn't strike you straight away as being an agricultural education channel, but it was set up almost 22 years ago, and it's to teach children where their food comes from. But it's grown arms and legs. There's a lot of other projects have come out of that, like growing potatoes and different things. But it's the Royal Highland Show, which most people probably have heard of. They are actually the parents of RHET, and they fund the RHET side of it, the project coordinators, of which there are 13 all over Scotland. And their main job is to liaise with schools and farmers to get children out onto farms and farmers into schools, to build up that link between the rural community and schools, because there's a lot of ignorance out there, about where food comes from. And it's a wonderful organisation. It really is, and they do a lot of good work.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. And you say there's a lot of ignorance, and it's true. And there's also a lot of just, I didn't realise I needed to know that. We were speaking to that guy, Farmer Luke, a few weeks ago, and he was like, when you consider that food comes from a farm, that's what we do. The masses for a while considered it came from a shop, and he made a really good point. I'd never considered this, that now a lot of kids will just think food arrives at the door because it's delivered there. They don't even know the shop side of it, which is crazy, actually. Food is just in the kitchen, and it arrives there, and it never really comes from anywhere, which is quite a scary prospect. That you couldn't have summed up RHET better, Elaine, and I didn't think there would be many people that would be able to sum it up better. But before we get into sort of what happens with RHET, how it runs, all that sort of thing, I want to introduce you to the four people we have on the call today. I probably should have done this before you told us, Elaine, but Elaine, could you tell us about yourself? Tell us about your non-RHET life.
My non-RHET life.
which is pretty, which is takes a lot out, I'm sure, but there's still a lot in there.
Yeah, I'm married to Jim, and we stay on a beef and arable farm in Ayrshire, well, in New Mills in Ayrshire. We also rear chickens from day old to point of lay. We've actually got about 35,000 baby chickens coming in today, so that's quite nice to get just before Christmas. So yeah, we have 2 children. Well, they're adults now, although I was a child bride, as you understand. Jennifer is 40 next year, and she's just recently got married to Adrian. Jennifer was a teacher but had to retire through ill health because Jennifer was diagnosed with MS. I have a son. He's down in Yorkshire with his wife Carrie, and they have 3 children, Clark, Cooper and Claudia, and they're just an absolute joy. Craig works, he's an area manager for Crone. Outside, I don't know, what do I do outside RHET? I do a lot at the Crossroads Community Hub. I help a lot out there, and yeah.
You do a lot with young farmers as well. Do quite a bit.
I do, yes, yeah. I just Jennifer and I produced their concert this year, so that was good fun. I've been working with Crossroads Young Farmers off and on for about 40 years, so yeah.
I actually thought you still were a young farmer, Elaine. Sorry, I misunderstood.
You're my favourite, Wallace.
It was a lovely little trip through the family tree there, and Jennifer deserves a mention because she's also involved in RHET, and she is just amazing with the kids. Absolutely amazing. Just brilliant at it. It's just made for her. We'll move on to Christine. Christine, obviously there's a story out there. There's a full hour where we had a chat together telling your full story, but you think you could sum it up in a minute or two about yourself?
Yes, well, if people can watch that podcast, things have changed a wee bit. I used to work for NFU Scotland for 25 years, but just recently I've moved over to work for the Monitor Farm programme, which is knowledge exchange programme for farmers, particularly in the beef and sheep sector. So I've been privileged to look after the South Ayrshire, Stirling and Isla Monitor Farm. So exciting times ahead for that. But I've been involved with RHET since its inception. In my role with NFU Scotland, we had a lot of schools approach us wanting to have farm visits, but farmers were cautious about doing it because of the health and safety and the logistics side of it. So a number of farmers at the time got together with our support, and we created RHET Ayrshire and Arran, and it'll be our 20th birthday next year, which is really exciting in 2023. And what the charity does is that we fundraise in Ayrshire to cover the expenses of the project coordinator and subsidise travel for the school children out to farm, which is becoming a bit challenging. But the main thing for farmers was that we do the charity does the risk assessment for them to make sure that the teachers and the pupils are coming to a safe and enjoyable experience, which is a big thing. And it's a real passion of mine, along with RSABI, another charity that I'm involved with. But what I would say is that I just endorse everything you have said about your other speaker who was on, that the gap between the consumers and the producers has widened exponentially in the last 20 years, but even more so in the last 10 to 5 years in the social media culture that we're on. What's real news and what's fake news and where does things come from. And really, as a farming industry, we're probably guilty of it as well, because whilst we have all these wonderful visits and we do a lot of great work with RHET, we talk about farming, and really we're food producers, and we need to say that more, that we produce food. Quite often children now don't even understand the concept of farming until they come out and see it. And that's what our fundamental role is that sharing that passion and that knowledge about food farming in the land.
Oh, definitely. And I think, one of the other members, a long-standing member of RHET Ayrshire and Arran, Alistair Love, sums this up perfectly. Like the faces you see when these kids see a pig or they see a cow or whatever, it's just brilliant. And then they start to understand what it means, why it's there, where it comes from. And it's very worthwhile. And it's been something that I've I don't know how long I've been involved on and off with RHET now, probably 5 years. That it's one of the most rewarding things in the world. It's great fun. Willie, could you tell us a bit about yourself?
Yeah, certainly. I'm a dairy, beef and sheep farmer in the Galston area. I farm along with my wife and my son and my son's partner, Rachel. My wife, Margaret, son, Robert, and Rachel and myself, we work away together. We have about 180 dairy cows in the farm. We fatten about 250 head of cattle per year over and above that. We lamb about 150 ewes, and we also buy in lambs from the Western Isles and the West Coast to come down onto our lush pastures in the winter for finishing off as well. So we're pretty busy with them through February, March, and into April. So that's the basis. We also grow about 70 acres of barley, sometimes 80 acres of barley for feeding to our own cows. I've been involved with RHET. I guess I've been involved since Ayrshire and Arran RHET inception. Going back a wee bit further, I was for 7 years. I represented young farmers, and by young farmers I mean those under the age of 40 actively farming at the European Parliament. And I always remember that at that time there was a bold initiative come out of Brussels, and it was called Awakening of the Senses. And basically that was about bringing the consumers and the producers together to get a greater understanding and make people aware of what was happening in the countryside. Now, when Ayrshire and Arran RHET was formed, that is exactly what we need. It's about bringing people together from both sides, the consumers and the producers. And as Christine has already said, we're not just farmers. That's a very generic term. We are the producers of the food. We are the people who care for the countryside, the people who make sure that any animals on our farm have a good life. And that takes a bit of explaining to people. And RHET is the absolutely best vehicle there is for that to happen. And it's two ways. There's no better feeling than when you spend the time explaining to a group of children what you're doing and why you're doing it, because sometimes you forget yourself. Mm-hmm. And it really brings it home that, we are doing a good job. We should be proud of ourselves. But we also need to explain that to the consumers, that we are producing the food in the best way we can. It's also about giving children opportunities. There are a huge number of opportunities for future careers in the countryside. And it helps in that way as well. And sometimes just gives people a focus on what they want to do in life later on. So it takes many, many boxes for me, and I'm delighted to be involved. Unfortunately, I'm busy. I don't have as much time to involve as I'd like, but it's a fantastic organisation.
How did you find yourself, Willie, getting involved Parliament-wise, as you said there? How did that come about?
How did that come about? I went to a meeting which was for those that weren't actually considered old enough to be involved in NFU, but too old for young farmers. Okay. And at that time, all support from Brussels was meant to be aimed at family farms. And the question of the night was, how do you define a family farm? And I seemed to give a fairly succinct answer to that question, and was asked if I would go and explain that in Brussels to the Commissioner, which I did. And things just grew arm and legs from there on. And for 6 of the 7 years, I actually led the UK delegation to Brussels. And that was hugely rewarding.
It must have been. That's quite something, that is. And what was your definition of a family farm?
Basically, it was, that's a long time ago now, Wallace, to remember, but it was about those that derive the vast majority of their income from the land which they actually had tenure over, whether that be ownership or tenancy. And the majority of the input to the farm was supplied by the family themselves.
Yeah. It's one of those terms that you could say was sort of ambiguous, but at the same time, it's really not. It should be quite easy to understand that one. I think you've hit the nail on the head. The last person to introduce, some of you may know, and I think it is fair to say that introducing this man is quite exciting for me, because he is the podcast guru for Scotland. He is the man. He is the person who any podcaster should look to and how to run a podcast. So, Alec, would you like to say hello and tell us about yourself?
Thank you, Wallace. You always flatter me with these kind of introductions. My name's Alec Perry. I'm an agricultural consultant. I work out of the SAC consulting office at Auchincruive in Ayrshire. I'm currently back in Campbelltown for the Christmas break. We have a dairy farm here on the peninsula in Kintyre, in the southwest. But in my day-to-day job, I'm very much a consultant occupied with topics around climate change, conservation and carbon, so big policy drivers for Scottish Government right now. And just making sure that our message as an industry is accessible to the general public. I think that that's hugely important, and RHET's a fantastic vehicle to do that.
And I mentioned podcasting. Tell us about that, why I said that.
Yeah, you did. Yeah, thanks very much. So I'm the host of the Thrill of the Hill podcast for the Farm Advisory Service, which is a Scottish Government initiative to allow for knowledge exchange from technical advisors and specialist consultants to the agricultural community. And like I say, as part of that, we have the Thrill of the Hill podcast, which is focused on issues that are impacting the farmed upland environment.
And could you tell us maybe, obviously folk are listening to this, listen to podcasts, could you tell us maybe some guests you've had on in recent weeks and months?
Yeah, well, the most recent podcast that we recorded was recorded with Stephen Inglis from RSPB and Patrick Laurie, who is an advocate for working for waders. And we had a bit of a summary of what the ground nesting wading bird population in Scotland has done in 2022. Talked a little bit about the kind of state of play of these national priority species and the impacts of monitoring across Scotland. Latterly, we've also had podcasts on the importance of understanding soil carbon, a review of COP26 and what came from that, and a whole host of other topics relating to the farmed upland environment.
Very good, and it is a good podcast. Alec is an old flatmate of mine, or a landlord, I should say. Sorry, Alec, we were not equal. So I did sort of hear a bit of background to the podcast. It is a good one. You should check out, especially if you are listening to rural-based podcasts like the R2Kast already. We've sort of graphed what RHET is. Royal Highland Education Trust, and Elaine put it very well. How they sort of get what needs to be done. But what is the sort of day-to-day of RHET? You know, we're looking at getting this sort of information to schools. How do we go about that? And I'll put that out to whoever wants to answer first.
As a past, I didn't mention it earlier, I was a project coordinator for RHET Ayrshire and Arran for 7 years, and I retired from that post. So the day-to-day work with RHET, it changes every day, that's the thing, but it's to coordinate between teachers and farmers. So a school will go on to the RHET website, which is the national website, and they go into the area that they are involved in as being Ayrshire and Arran, and they'll look at what's available, whether it be a class talk or a visit from the countryside classroom in Wheels or a farm visit, and they fill in a booking form. It gets emailed through to the project coordinator, who then sets about pairing up a farm with the school, and they do a risk assessment and offer a pre-visit for the school if need be, for the teacher to have a wee look around. Sometimes that's helpful if there are children there with additional education needs. It's sometimes helpful for the teacher to see, what's going to be happening on the day. So that's the kind of, that's where the project coordinator's main focus is to, keep that coordination running smoothly and get it done as quickly as possible.
It was always quite exciting when I first got involved to see Elaine's spreadsheets. I mean, it was just like, if you had a timetable for the day, it would be, you're doing this at 9:30 and 10 seconds until 9:40 and 23 seconds. It was strict. This is what you have to do. It was a well-oiled machine, that's for sure. And Elaine mentioned project coordinator there. Unfortunately, RHET Ayrshire and Arran's project coordinator can't be with us today. She is full of the flu, but Katie Strawhorn has taken on that mantle and is doing it fantastically. Christine, earlier you mentioned sort of subsidised with travel and stuff like that, and you mentioned the sort of challenges with that. What challenges do face a countryside initiative like Ayrshire and Arran?
Well, probably like a lot of charities, pre and particularly post-pandemic, funding can be problematic. We need to try and make it as easy and accessible for children to get out onto farms, because there's 101 different subjects that children could be studying, but basically a farm can teach about every subject when we get them there. But obviously the bus costs have increased exponentially. There's less competition in the bus market, drivers, these types of things. So we do have to try and fundraise, which we've been struggling with over the last 2 years, because a lot of our stuff was quite ad hoc and very social fundraising activities. So we are looking to see as to how to become more sustainable, that we can have regular supporters on board who would give a financial donation every year, and that would allow us to set out what we could fund going forward rather than being as ad hoc, because the whole thing is to try and make the charity sustainable. So whilst as though the project coordinator is funded through the parent charity, we have that fundraising role locally, and also the governance role locally. And that's hugely important, because I always see this as being the farmer's charity. I'm a farmer's daughter, I don't farm myself, but this is the farmer's charity. This is how they get their message across. We've been very good at having a bigger digital presence, which is fantastic for getting children geared up pre and post visit, and for all ages. So it's from 4 to 18. On farm, you can't tell from a video that a lamb is actually warm, or an egg that comes from a hen is actually warm. And one of the recent observations or questions that a child said, somebody said to them, what do you get from, what does a hen lay? What does a hen lay? And the answer was chicken nuggets.
Oh, really?
So, yeah. So you were just talking earlier, it's that complete detachment from where their food comes from, that, it's the soil, which is a living, breathing thing. It's the animals, it's the farmers. It's vitally important that we get people on board to support us both financially and with their time. And we cannot thank the farmers enough, who are very, very busy. But farmers like Willie, and we've got a lot of others who open their doors, that they're willing and wanting children to come onto farm. And really, schools should make that a priority, because it's the basis of life, is where your food comes from.
I would just like to quickly interrupt the show for a minute to give you some extra information on our primary sponsors, A-Plan Rural. A-Plan offer bespoke cover for farms and estates the UK over, and will give you tailored insurance for anything on the farm, from your old workhorse tractor that's been around 20 years, or a fancy new and exciting diversification.
Oh, absolutely. And these stories, like, do they lay chicken nuggets and stuff like that? They're cute. It's like, oh, that's quite nice. But then when you really look into it, you're like, wow, this is something we've got to try and change. And yeah, it's, I think, RHET are right at the core of that. Willie, could you tell us about those farm trips? What's involved for a kid if they get to go out to a farm?
Yeah, well, it depends what level of information or knowledge that the kids have. You need to have a starting point, but I like to take it right back to the basics. Walk out into a field, take the kids into a field, and just say, what do you see? And to begin with, they see nothing. Then you say, well, there's a hedge there. Could you listen to the hedge? What's in the hedge? There's birds in the hedge. You're standing in the field, there's grass. What eats the grass? The cows eat the grass. They see the cows around them. What's under the soil? Look down, find an earthworm. That's so important to the growth of the grass, just the whole story. And to take the kids from there to the milking parlour, to see how the cow has been clever enough with its 4 stomachs to convert that grass, which grew because the earthworms were below the soil, because the grass had captured the sunlight, to convert that into milk. To see that, the whole chain reaction right through there is phenomenal. and then to explain the care and attention that goes into looking after the animals. And a revelating factor is when you say to the kids and you explain your day's work to them. And I started at 5 this morning and I milked the cows, I fed the cows, I fed the calves, fed all the rest. What did I do after that? I had my own breakfast. But before I did that, I cared for all these animals. Mm-hmm. It shows that it brings the compassion to the whole thing. It shows how we are trying to give a good life to the animals. And it makes the kids realise that this is a noble profession. It's something they may want to be involved in at a later stage. It also it teaches them to show respect for the countryside. It makes them aware that we are guardians of that countryside. And, it depends what age of kids you have. I mean, if you have very young kids, if you can just show the nice, good animals, that's a starting point. Mm-hmm. But you do hope that you're building a lifelong relationship with these people, and that their knowledge of the countryside will grow, and that you will inspire within them a hunger to learn more about what we're doing. And I find it one of the most rewarding things, just explaining that to the kids and seeing how they respond to it. And at the time, we're always busy and we think we haven't time for this visit. But my goodness, there never was better time spent than when you see those kids going back in the bus, knowing that they have learnt so much, that they've gained an understanding of what you're doing, and then going to the school to meet them and the further questions that they have. It's one of the most rewarding things that you can do.
It's quite. I mean, I've never. Well, I have actually. I've done one farm visit at our farm in Arran. We've also done Vlammen Lives, which were always quite fun. Shout out to Kilpatrick Farm, Alison and David Henderson, and Neil and Kate and Kirsty and the full shebang there. Open up 2 lambing sheds, busiest time of the year, and I remember sitting in there absolutely petrified just before 10 in the morning, before about 80 folk were turning up, and then they turn up and they're a bit nervous, a bit shy to come and see what's happening, and then a lamb appears, and then suddenly woof, everyone's interested, everyone's keen to see what's happening. There's a million questions, and some of the questions from adults are just, I don't like to say the word worrying because that's not fair, but it's shocking, I guess you could say. Like, oh wow, I did not expect to hear that. Like, where does lamb come from? These sort of questions that you hear, like your question there, Christine, that sort of thing. And as I say, I don't like the word worrying, because if someone asked me about, I don't know, bricklaying, I would have no idea. But it's something that we are sitting down to, hopefully, 3 times a day, food, and we really should be able to work out where that's coming from. Alec, your sort of day-to-day job is speaking to farmers and speaking to officials and such, like quite high-end, knowledgeable discussions. How do you feel? How have you enjoyed sort of that transition to explaining it to kids and youngsters instead?
I always remember my first experience with RHET. We were at one of the smaller, more local shows in Ayrshire, and there is that kind of transition into, okay, what level of information is appropriate for this age group of kids, and you do think, oh, have I made this too simple? Have I made this too complicated? But I think it's about finding the right kids, coming in with the right message, giving them something that they can relate to, and making it interesting. I mean, just to your point there, Wallace, and kind of tying back into what Willie has said there. I mean, you said that it was concerning that there's questions from adults. I think that just reflects the kind of generational challenge that we've got, and that engagement with the rural community and the farming community has been a big issue for a number of years. This isn't a relatively new thing. So yeah, I think being able to come in at multiple levels and know at what point your message is appropriate is really important.
I assume ground nesting waders was just about high. Is that right?
Yeah.
You mentioned about going to the show there, Alec. I think this is one thing that Ayrshire and Arran really do stand out amongst the rest at the minute. How we have a trailer. how did the sea cow come about? And I've sort of directed this at you, Alec. Maybe it's more for Christine and Elaine. But how did that come about? Where was the idea of that, and has it been a success?
Well, I won't say too much about that. I'll leave it to Christine and Elaine. But I do think, in reflection, having the sea cow was one of the best things that we did. I mean, people do not instinctively think, oh, there's a farm there, let's go and find out what's going on. But if you put on a local show, an event that the community can kind of come together around, people are engaged with that, and they will go just out of curiosity to see what's on. And so I think it's a great opportunity to get in front of people who we don't often have the opportunity to speak to.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want me to come in and the history of the sea cow, Wallace, is that you'll learn in time that you should never ask me, oh, I'd quite like something. And because I'll just say, right, we'll go and get that, but not actually know how we're going to go and get it. And Elaine had said, oh, some of the other, I think it was up in the north, they've got this sea cow, which is short for countryside classroom on wheels. And essentially it is a zooped up trailer which can be opened out, and we can put livestock in it and take it to school. The main driver for it is to actually take it into schools, so we can actually take the countryside to the classroom, which
the main driver, Jimmy Bryson, is it not? Is the main driver
Elaine is the main driver. We were quite a duo, Elaine and I, with this. There was lots of sleepless nights and chats over sea cows, and we were away in a wee sea cow world of our own, and nobody knew who we were talking about, but we managed to get it delivered. But thankfully through Stuart Trailers, who kindly put the trailer together for us during lockdown as well, and funding through I managed to get funding. It was a chunk of money. It was about £25,000 to get this, which we would have really struggled to fundraise for. So we had funding from a legacy project from the LEADER programme, which was Scottish Government and European funding. So we're immensely grateful to them. And we got it to happen. And Elaine was the one who put all the sparkle to make it actually hit the road.
Well,
right,
yeah, could you tell us a bit more about that, lady? Because it is an excellent resource.
Oh, it's just been. I'm like Christine. It's definitely been the best resource that we've got, and I think, given the cost of buses, I think it's going to be even more popular, because schools can't afford the buses to go out onto farms. And I know that ideally that is what we want, but to take the sea cow in with maybe a calf or a couple of lambs in it, if that's the best we can offer the school at that time, that's absolutely brilliant. But we've got a lot of resources in it, and there's a lot of information in it, and I know Jennifer and I, my daughter and I, we've been out at a couple of schools. You go out in the morning and it's basically the whole school thing. You get nursery right through to primary 7. And it's just absolutely brilliant, the number of kids that you can see, and that they're seeing and touching animals the same as they would on a farm, obviously not in the same scale. We've been lucky enough to have a farmer to come and speak to them at the time. And what we tend to do is ask the teachers, what subjects they're actually covering at that time, and we try and kind of zone in and try and work that into some of the subjects that they're actually covering. But it's a fantastic resource, and it's been used a lot. As you say, it's been to local shows. It's been to Careers Day at Dumfries House, Food and Farming Day at Dumfries House. It's been out at quite a number of schools. It's been over at Arran for the Lambing Live Day. So yes, it's been well travelled. We should really keep the number of miles that it does in a year, but it's great.
It'd be fair interesting to see the mile count, in fairness.
Actually.
I'm just trying to think. where I was at Dorai, Comores, Ayr partially. There was one other. I did 4, I think. Or was it 5?
New Mills. You were at
New Mills. It's yes, that deserves a mention. And Elaine will go quiet and modest here, I'm sure. But New Milnes show, if you haven't been to New Milnes show, which I hadn't until this year, they have like an it's got a name, Elaine. It's not an education hub.
Education barn.
That's the education barn, and it's just brilliant. Fantastic. It's so good. Kids get to have their sort of arts and crafts at one end. Fantastic. There's information about all the RHET story, everything, and it's excellent. I think a lot of local shows could take a sort of leaf out of, well, let's be serious, Elaine's book, and and have something like that there, because it really is brilliant. We mentioned, I think it was you, Christine, you mentioned lockdown. How did RHET as a whole, really, but let's focus on RHET Ayrshire and Arran, focus and put their sort of work in place through COVID?
I think the key thing for us, thanks to Zoom, we kept going as a committee. So, we still met, even though it was via Zoom. So we didn't let that drop. We didn't let that ball drop, which has meant it's been slightly easier to come bounce back post-COVID. At the end of the day, the charity is all about people. And we talk about the Countryside Classroom on Wheels, which we were able to take out to 1 or 2 things in the second, like last year, and particularly this year. But the sea cow trailer is very pretty, and it's got colours, and we can put calves in it. But as an inanimate object, it's our volunteers that bring that alive. It's the farmers, it's Elaine. I can't emphasise that we are a people charity, because without the people and without the volunteers, it's just a trailer. It really is. And you can put a calf in it, but it's just a calf in a trailer. I'm so passionate about our volunteers who bring it to life. But what we did do was a number of things online, including one of our great volunteers, John Howie, and we did talk to a farmer session, which was great. So that was replicated across Scotland, where children dialed into a video call with a local farmer, and it was like an interview style. Elaine will probably maybe expand more, but Elaine spoke to John about the farm and what he does. So again, we have embraced the digital age, but that must always be complementary to, there's a huge portal. If any teachers or any farmers or anybody watching this, all your huge audience watching your R2Kast was, if you go into rhet.org.uk, there's a huge amount of digital resources there for learning. And what I'm really passionate about, amongst other things, is the fact that, farming can teach you everything. Your life skills, your science, the environment, technology. Technology is a huge thing in farming now. It's, a huge employer in Scotland as well for careers, with all the specialists that are around about that, right down to actually, from field to plate. It's a massive employment opportunity. I was just out in Islay last week, and you see all the distilleries, and that all comes from growing barley food. So we have a great story to tell, but we need people to tell it, and we really need more people involved with the charity to keep sharing their story. I went way off subject there, didn't I, Wallace? So.
You did, Christine, but it was brilliant. It was absolutely just what we were after. It's all right, Christine, we're used to it. We're used to it. All for the better. All for the better. Willie, I think you're the only person in here that's sort of maybe yourself, Elaine. I'll ask the question and I'll be corrected if need be. That's sort of done farm tours on their farm. Could you, if you were to tell, or if you were to say to another farmer, to try and convince them, what would you say to them to get involved?
Well, I think you just say that you put all your concerns behind you. You have got the professionalism of RHET there. You've got very capable people like Elaine and Christine that will come on farm first. They'll see if there are any pitfalls, if there are any dangers, any hazards. That side of it's all taken care of. You're then bringing a group of children onto the farm under the auspices of RHET. It's well organised. it's not just chaotic kids running around the farm. It's well organised. The hand washing facilities are there. All the safety procedures are in place. You have insurance in place. If the very worst happens, you hope it doesn't. And you know, go along with it. Enjoy the day. Relish that interaction between your consumers and yourself. Make the most of it. You'll feel a better person at the end of it once you've explained to them what you're doing. You come to realise yourself what you're doing. Another thing to bear in mind, and you know, you don't always talk about it in farming, but we are very isolated where we are. We are remote by the very nature of what we're doing. And here's a chance just to meet up with some other people, to get there, to alleviate the misunderstandings that are between them and ourselves. Just relish that opportunity to see those people those young people, as they awaken to what's around them, what actually happens in farms. They'll think more of you at the end of it, and I'm very certain you'll think more of them, and you'll probably think more of yourself.
I think that the sort of, and Christine mentioned it earlier, the coming onto the farm and make sure risk assessments are done and everything's fine is the big worry. You know, I think 99% of folk on farms would be really keen to show what they're doing and get that story out there, but there's that worry. You don't want someone getting hurt, you don't want anything happening, but all of those precautions are taken and done in a very professional manner. Christine, you mentioned the whisky distilleries on Islay there. If you are listening and that is of interest to you, we have had the main producer of barley for Brew Chladach whisky, which is based on Islay, R2Kast number 51, I believe, Andrew and Sophie of Cool Farm Islay, COULLFARMISLAY, if you want to check them out on Instagram, so you can find a bit about that story there if you want. Elaine, you mentioned Food and Farming Days and Careers Days and Dumfries House, which has been very important to RHET Ayrshire and Arran. I'm sure we'll all agree. Could you tell us what those days involve?
Oh gosh, there's quite a lot of there's a lot of spreadsheets, Wallace.
There is.
For the Food and Farming Days, that involves about 600 primary school children, primary 4, 5, and there are about 70, I'll say about 75 volunteers involved on the day to actually put on the Food and Farming Day for the children. There are what we would call stations where the children go, and it covers every aspect of farming. There'll be about 24 different stages where they go. There's horseshoeing, there's dairy, beef, sheep. We have QMS, they come and talk to the children. We have a butcher, there's bees, soil, machinery. We try and cover as much as we possibly can. You could have less stations, that's something that we discussed, but it's to give the children a taster and also the teachers, and hopefully it'll encourage them to then, you know, take the children on an actual RHET visit out onto a farm. They've been a huge success. We get a lot of positive feedback from them. But Dumfries House is just, you've been there, Wallace. It's the best classroom in the world. It's so good. It's just amazing. And we're very, very lucky to have such a good partnership with them.
I hope you've kicked your feet up and got comfy and enjoying another fantastic episode of the R2Kast with another really interesting guest. I would just like to quickly take another second to plug the sponsors of the show today, the Scottish Farmer, and I would strongly advise you to go out and pick one up this week and see even more of the fantastic people that are in our industry.
I mean, as someone who sort of in their day job works in farm-based education on a campus that has a farm, I always thought we don't have this first part. And then when I went to Dumfries House that day, I was like, oh, we do have that first part. It was brilliant. And you're talking about sort of less stations. I think, you know, when you consider attention spans and whatnot, especially at that age, I think It was 16 on the day, and if you do want to go check it out, I've just looked up on YouTube what the name of the video was. Dumfries House Food and Farming Day with RHET. It's on YouTube there if you want to have a peek at it. What happened? The video quality is terrible because I was in charge, but it does sort of show what's happening. But just excellent, and seeing how excited kids were, and such a variation of kids, which was brilliant. And I vividly remember one wee boy who had autism, and his thing was military vehicles, and that lad knew everything. He was about 6, and his knowledge base was phenomenal. And the teacher was adamant, he won't focus on anything, and shout out Ariane, who was doing the sort of the chicken demonstration. I went and picked up a wee chick, and he cared for that thing more than anything on the planet. It was brilliant, and we're not there for us, but you take these things home, and they're very positive and they're very nice, and it's so if you do want to get involved, from 5 of us here, I think we'd all say get involved, and this is Ayrshire and Arran, but if you're based in Perth and Kinross, get involved there, get involved wherever you are. The more kids that are sort of hearing the farming story throughout Scotland, the better. I think it's quite cool that the first 2 episodes we've done have been with RHET and Countryside Learning, two sort of charities aimed at getting that sort of education into schools. So if you want to hear the sort of more stricter secondary school version, jump back to R2Kast 70. But there's always 2 questions I end every podcast with, but they don't really fit this type of podcast. So I haven't really got 2 questions to end the podcast with. And in fairness, with this whole group podcast thing, I haven't got a name. I haven't got final 2 questions. I'm really just not very good at this whole podcasting game. But the thing I quite like asking everyone is, if I was to, and I'm going to put this to all 4 of you, I want to hear the answer from all 4 of you. 2 questions. If you were to describe and try and sum up RHET quickly, how would you do it? And if you were to try and convince someone to get involved, be that as a farm volunteer, committee member, maybe even as a future project coordinator, how would you do that? Whoever wants to go first, feel free.
I'll go first when I've got something in my head, but I would just say it's the best thing ever. I'm a great believer in life that you whatever you put in, you'll get back tenfold. And RHET does that. That's a great bunch of people to work with. And actually, and we spoke about this before, Wallace, in the one podcast that we did together, for positivity and for your own mental health, it's phenomenal. As Willie said, there's a great team, the volunteers and the committee, but that whole connection back to children, farmers just don't realise how special they are. And that USP, that unique selling point, I can actually bring people and connect them to the land and to their food. So rather than spending, half an hour or an hour on social media looking at negative things, empower yourself to have a farm visit and see that positivity and tell them the true story about how you look after and care for the land and the animals, and the positivity is immense. See, if you give whatever you put in, it will get paid back 100% and more. So whether it's a volunteering, raising funds, supporting our food and farming days, anything, just get involved and you will not regret it.
I mean, you can't get much better advice or statements than "it's the best thing ever." I mean, that's, what more could you ask for? What more could you ask for? Who wants to go next? I don't want to force anyone in case they're taking a minute to think.
Well, how do you follow that?
I don't know, how do you follow that? I don't want to try follow.
Now, Wallace, if I could just say, you said it yourself at the beginning. You pointed out that the consumers and the farmers have become wide apart. Firstly, they thought the food came from the shops. Now it just arrives on the doorstep. They don't understand that bit in between. And it's important that they do, but equally it's important to us that they do and that we understand them. And here is the glue which brings the countryside and the consumers together. And RHET does a fantastic job, and we so badly need that. And I mean, we, the farmers, we so badly need that, as well as the kids and the consumers of the future. Remember, every one of those kids one day is going to run a household, is going to be the key person that buys the food. And we are doing ourselves a huge favour if we can give them an understanding of what actually happens. I think that really says it all. It's the glue that brings us all together, and we need to be together. And let's face it, as time goes by, everyone can follow back their roots to a farm somewhere, but it's becoming further and further removed. And here's a chance for us all just to have an understanding of one another. And with an understanding of one another, all our lifestyles become better. And, RHET is doing a fantastic job to make that happen.
Couldn't agree more. Who's going to jump in next? Chris?
No, here I go. What I would like to say is a lot of farmers, when a farmer shows interest about taking farm visits, I would go out and visit them and have a wee chat. And the majority of them will say, I've no idea what I'm going to talk about. And, farmers have a never-ending story, and they don't realise how important they are. And, to see a farmer's face at the end of a visit when all these children are looking at them as if they're superheroes, it is just, I'm actually getting goosebumps talking about this. And sorry, I'm going to digress here slightly. I went into a farm when it was a dairy farm, and it was during the horrendous price carry on that was going on in the milk industry. And this farmer, he was in his boots. Well, literally, he was in his boots. He was down in the mouth, and he says, I just don't know if I can sustain this. And he said, it's just getting me down. And I thought, oh, bless you. And here you've taken a farm visit. Well, that school bus came up the Reden, off these kids came, and he just went into farmer mode. It's the best job in the world. I love being a farmer. And when the children went back in the bus, he put his arm round about me and he said, that's the best medicine that you can have. He said, that's made me realise why I do what I do. And that was one of the highlights of my time with RHET, because it just summed it up. Farmers don't realise how great they are. They really don't. They hide their light under a bushel. Is that the thing I'm trying to say? They're not very good at saying, look at me, I'm a farmer, look what I do, I grow food, I rear cattle, I do. They're not great at doing that. And if I could get that message across, just during my 7 years with RHET, I took on about 25 new farms. There is not one of those farmers has turned around and said, don't ever bring a visit to my farm again. They've all embraced it, and that's what's important.
I mean, you said you get goosebumps. No, you didn't. You said you get goosebumps thinking about it. And when you said that there, I was the same. That's a heartwarming story. Alec, as the youngest member of the call, but not that it sounds like I'm out and everyone else. Oh, that was a dangerous. I'll just don't know how to go on from this one. No, Alec is no, not say the same thing, Wallace. You'll just get in trouble from Elaine. She's giving you the eye, and you're already in bother. What would your sort of advice to someone? And we've just taken on a sort of young farming representative of Ayrshire and Arran, Fraser Graham, to try and get more folk your age involved. Alec, what would you be saying to them?
I would say that, the young people coming into the industry right now, the people who are coming through, young farmers right now, are the people who are going to need to advocate for the industry in the next 10 years. So it's really key to get them involved. But just to come back to what Willie said earlier and what Elaine has just said, I think farming comes under a lot of pressure from a lot of different angles. And it can sometimes be quite isolating. And I think being part of RHET gives you that opportunity to acknowledge your own worth and what you're trying to achieve, and at the same time, you're getting the kids on farm. You're getting them engaged with your topic. You're demonstrating the value of what you're giving to them and to the broader society, and like you say, it makes you feel good. It gives you a lift as well to know that what you're doing is valued. I would say that in a broader sense, I mean, agriculture in Scotland is coming into a bit of a transition period, and things are going to change in the next couple of years. I mean, we know that provision of public good is a really big priority for Scottish Government, and I would argue that engagement with agriculture and getting kids out on farms, that's one of the greatest public goods that we have the opportunity of providing. So I would just echo everything everybody's already said. Like, please do get involved. It's what you make it, and there's huge potential.
Very good. I think very well summed up by the four of you, in fairness. Brilliant. So if you're out there and you're an Ayrshire farmer, or not even Ayrshire, we're focusing on Ayrshire and Arran today, but on the group podcast, I do intend on trying to get other countryside initiatives on to tell their story, which will be based on the same principle, but everyone has different methods in which they do it, and it's quite interesting to see that, in fairness, having just moved down to Dumfries to see the way Dumfries operate, and I've got friends in different CIs across the country, just seeing the way that the same story is portrayed, and it's very inventive to see the different methods out there. I always appreciate feedback. We've obviously done quite a few podcasts now. We're knocking on 80, almost there. Technically, today is the day that we have done 100 interviews, because I did 24 people in farming discussions before I started the podcast. So it's quite a big moment, that. But this series, if you will, is new. So please give me some feedback. Let me know. Message me on Instagram, Facebook, whatever. You can also put little reviews on Spotify, Apple Podcasts and whatnot. If you like this sort of dynamic, it's a different one to interview, but it's quite fun to sort of hear how different minds can come together for a mutual goal. As I said, we'll be seeing you on Friday for Alstroemeria Ben. So I love that name now, I know how to say it. Talking about flower growth in the country, and it will be from his greenhouse. So I'm very excited to see that. He'll be sort of guiding us through what's involved, and I will have no idea what I'm talking about. But to Willie, Christine, Alec and Elaine, thank you very much. I hope you've enjoyed yourself.
Yeah,
Well, great fun.
Good.
Thanks for the opportunity.
No, not at all. And I want to try and get as much publicity to good causes as I can, and I think that's going to be the use of this group side of the podcast. And RHET is certainly right at the top of the list. And you mentioned fundraising and whatnot. Certainly the sponsorship from this episode will be going to RHET Ayrshire and Arran. So
Thank you.
No, not at all. Not at all. I wanted to be more involved this year. Obviously, was supposed to be more involved, but had to step down, and it wasn't something I took easily. So that will be my contribution from the podcast. But thank you all very much. It's been a pleasure. It's been quite cool to sort of have a meeting where we're not following an agenda, and just see what everyone's minds think about RHET Ayrshire and Arran. But thank you all for coming on. Thank you for listening, and we shall see you on Friday for R2Kast number 77.
I hope you've enjoyed another excellent episode of the R2Kast. I just want to take this moment to quickly thank our primary sponsors once more, A-Plan Rural. If you follow A-Plan on social media, you'll see the work they're doing to really promote British farming and back our industry. It's been a pleasure working alongside A-Plan Rural so far, and long may it continue. The values of A-Plan Rural runs perfectly in line with the whole mantra of rural to kitchen, and I'm glad to have them on board. Check them out on Instagram at A-Plan Rural and on Facebook at A-Plan Rural Insurance. See you for the next podcast.